The dusty streets of Redemption Creek had seen their share of desperate souls seeking sanctuary, but the young woman who stumbled into town, clutching a baby to her chest, on that blazing July morning in 1889, carried a desperation that made even the hardest hearts take notice. Colt Maverick sat in the shadows of the Silver Dollar Saloon's porch, nursing whiskey that burned less than the memories he was trying to forget. At 29, he had already lived 3 lifetimes worth of violence and betrayal, a former cavalry officer turned gunfighter turned outlaw, with a price on his head that grew larger with each town he was forced to flee. The star-shaped scar on his left cheek and the bullet-scarred hands that never quite stopped shaking were testaments to a life lived on the wrong side of every law that mattered. He should have been planning his next move, counting the dwindling coins in his pocket, or cleaning the Colt 45 that had kept him alive through more gunfights than he cared to remember. Instead, he found himself watching the woman who had just collapsed on the boardwalk across the street, her baby's cries piercing the afternoon heat like accusations against an uncaring world. She couldn't have been more than 22, with auburn hair escaping from a hastily pinned bun and a dress that had once been fine, but now bore the stains of hard travel and desperate flight. What struck Colt most powerfully wasn't her obvious exhaustion or the way she protectively curved her body around the infant in her arms. It was the way her green eyes constantly scanned the horizon like a hunted animal watching for predators. But the most shocking discovery was what happened when the town's self-appointed moral guardians decided to take action. "Can't have that kind of woman cluttering up our streets," declared Ezra Whitman, the bank president whose crisp suit and carefully waxed mustache marked him as a man who had never known genuine hardship. "Look at her. No wedding ring, baby with no father in sight. She's obviously a fallen woman, probably diseased. We need to move her along before she corrupts our decent citizens." Behind Whitman stood Mayor Hayes and Sheriff Duncan, both nodding agreement with the confidence of men who had never questioned their right to decide other people's fates. They approached the woman with the casual authority of people accustomed to having their orders followed without question. "Miss, you can't stay here," Sheriff Duncan announced, his badge glinting in the sun as he loomed over her small form. "This is a respectable town. We don't allow your kind to loiter on our streets." The woman looked up at him, her arms tightening protectively around her baby. "Please, I'm not causing any trouble. I just need a moment's rest. My baby is sick, and I haven't eaten in 2 days." "Should have thought of that before you got yourself in this condition," Mayor Hayes sneered. "There's a mission house 20 miles north. They take in women like you." "Women like me?" she repeated, confusion mixing with growing fear in her voice. "I don't understand. What have I done wrong?" Whitman stepped forward, his expression radiating the kind of righteous disgust that masked deeper cruelties. "Don't play innocent with us. Unmarried woman with a baby, traveling alone, begging on our streets, we know exactly what you are." That's when Colt Maverick made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. The outlaw rose from his chair with fluid grace, his spurs ringing against the wooden porch as he stepped into the harsh sunlight. Every man in the street recognized him. His reputation had preceded him to Redemption Creek weeks ago, but seeing him in motion was different from hearing stories. There was something predatory in the way he moved, something that made even armed men step back instinctively. "Gentlemen," Colt said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of making life-and-death decisions, "I couldn't help but notice you're bothering the lady." Sheriff Duncan's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped as he met Colt's eyes. "This ain't your concern, Maverick. Move along." "See, that's where you're wrong," Colt replied, stepping closer to the woman and child. "I make it my concern when 3 grown men decide to intimidate a woman with a sick baby. Doesn't seem very sporting to me." The woman looked up at Colt with a mixture of hope and terror, clearly recognizing him as another kind of danger, but desperate enough to accept help from any source. Her baby had stopped crying and was now making the kind of weak, listless sounds that spoke of genuine illness. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They say I can't stay here. But my baby has fever and I don't have money for medicine or food." Colt knelt beside her, his movements careful and non-threatening. Up close, he could see that her unwed mother appearance was misleading. There was a pale band on her ring finger where a wedding band had recently been removed, and her dress, though travel-stained, was well-made and properly fitted. This wasn't a fallen woman, but a lady in genuine distress. And that's when everything changed forever. "What's your name?" Colt asked gently, ignoring the three officials who were watching this interaction with growing alarm. "Anna," she replied. "Anna Westfield, and this is my daughter, Hope." "Well, Miss Anna," Colt said, rising to his full height and fixing the three men with a stare that made them visibly uncomfortable. "It seems to me that a lady traveling with her child deserves better treatment than she's been receiving." "Now see here, Maverick," Whitman blustered, trying to recover his authority. "You can't just—" "Can't what?" Colt interrupted, his hand resting casually near his gun. "Can't object to three men terrorizing a woman and sick child? Can't suggest that maybe Christian charity extends to folks who need help instead of judgment?" Sheriff Duncan found his courage. "She's not married. The baby's illegitimate. We won't have that kind of moral corruption in our town." Colt's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Moral corruption? You three are standing here threatening to throw a sick baby out into the desert, and you're worried about moral corruption?" He turned to Anna, his voice gentling. "Ma'am, would you do me the honor of accepting my protection? I'm not much of a gentleman, but I can guarantee nobody's going to bother you while you're under my care." Anna studied his face, seeing something there that the town officials had missed, genuine compassion beneath the outlaw reputation, and a code of honor that had nothing to do with legal badges or social respectability. "Yes," she said simply. "Thank you. But you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet." As Colt helped Anna to her feet and gathered her few belongings, she began to tell him her real story, a tale that revealed the three respectable men as something far worse than mere small-town bullies. Anna Westfield had been married to Robert Westfield, a federal marshal investigating reports of corruption in territorial land offices throughout Arizona and New Mexico. Her husband had discovered evidence of a massive conspiracy involving forged deeds, stolen homestead claims, and the systematic displacement of settlers whose land contained mineral rights. Robert was getting close to exposing everything, Anna explained as Colt led her to the boarding house and paid for a room with money he could ill afford to spend. He had documents proving that dozens of families had been cheated out of their properties through fraudulent legal proceedings. She cradled baby Hope, who was indeed running a dangerous fever, as she continued her story. 3 weeks ago, Robert was supposed to meet with a federal prosecutor in Santa Fe. Instead, he was found dead on the trail, shot in the back and robbed of everything except his badge. Colt felt the familiar cold anger that had driven him to outlawry beginning to burn in his chest. "Let me guess. The local law ruled it a robbery by unknown bandits." Anna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Sheriff Duncan said there was nothing to investigate, said federal marshals made good targets for desperate men. But I know better. Robert had been receiving threats for weeks, and the night before he died, he told me he suspected someone in local law enforcement was involved in the land scheme." The implications were staggering. Sheriff Duncan, Mayor Hayes, and Bank President Whitman weren't just small-town bullies. They were likely conspirators in the murder of a federal officer and the theft of evidence that could have saved dozens of families from losing their homes. "Why didn't you go to the territorial authorities?" Colt asked. "I tried," Anna replied bitterly. "But Robert's notes and documents disappeared from our house the same night he was killed. Without evidence, I was just another grieving widow making wild accusations. Worse, I started receiving visits from men who suggested I might follow my husband's fate if I kept asking inconvenient questions." Wait, don't miss this crucial detail. As Anna settled Hope in the boarding house room and Colt went to find a doctor for the baby, she revealed the piece of information that transformed everything from a simple rescue into a mission of justice. "There's something else," Anna said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she checked to make sure they weren't overheard. "Before he died, Robert hid copies of all his evidence. He told me if anything happened to him I should take Hope and run, but first I should recover the papers from their hiding place. Colt's attention sharpened. Where? The old mine shaft 3 miles north of town. He buried a metal box containing photographs of forged documents, correspondence between the conspirators, and a complete list of families whose land was stolen. Anna's green eyes blazed with determination. I was on my way there when Hope got sick. I couldn't risk taking her into the desert while she has fever. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Robert Westfield hadn't just discovered the land scheme, he'd been methodical about gathering evidence and creating backup documentation. That evidence was sitting in an abandoned mine, waiting to expose the corruption that had killed him. But recovering it would require someone willing to take enormous risks, and Anna was in no condition to make such a dangerous journey with a sick baby. I'll get the evidence, Colt said simply. Anna stared at him in shock. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. This isn't your fight. Colt was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the street where 3 corrupt officials were probably planning their next move. Maybe it is my fight. Maybe I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by men who hide behind badges and respectability while they steal and murder. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what happens next. The recovery mission took place that night, with Colt using all his skills as a former cavalry scout to navigate the treacherous desert terrain and locate the hidden evidence. What he found in Robert Westfield's carefully buried box was even more damning than Anna had described. Photographs of forged documents, detailed financial records showing how stolen land was sold to mining companies, and correspondence that implicated not just local officials, but territorial politicians and federal appointees. But the most shocking discovery was a letter Robert had written to his wife, to be opened only if he died under suspicious circumstances. In it, he revealed that he'd been working undercover for over a year, building a case that reached all the way to Washington. He'd suspected his cover had been blown and that his life was in danger, but he'd continued the investigation because too many innocent families were suffering. Anna, the letter read, if you're reading this, then they got to me before I could finish what I started. The evidence in this box will convict dozens of criminals, but only if it reaches the right people. Trust no local authorities. The corruption goes too deep. Get the documents to Federal Judge Harrison in Denver. He's one of the few honest men left in the territorial system. Colt returned to town before dawn, his saddlebags loaded with enough evidence to bring down a conspiracy that had destroyed hundreds of lives. But he also returned to find Anna and Hope gone from their room, and a message that made his blood run cold. Scratched into the wooden dresser was a single word: trade. The 3 officials had taken Anna and her baby hostage, betting that Colt's obvious protective feelings would make him hand over whatever evidence Robert Westfield had hidden. It was a calculated gamble based on their assessment of Colt as just another outlaw who could be manipulated through threats and intimidation. They had badly underestimated the man they were dealing with. And that's when the most incredible showdown began. The confrontation took place at noon in the center of Redemption Creek's main street, with half the town watching from behind closed shutters, and the other half gathered on porches to witness what everyone knew would be a reckoning. Sheriff Duncan, Mayor Hayes, and Whitman stood in a line facing Colt, their confidence buoyed by superior numbers and the backing of hired guns they'd brought in from neighboring towns. Anna and Hope were being held in the bank, visible through the large front windows, with armed guards positioned to ensure Colt's cooperation. "It's simple, Maverick," Sheriff Duncan called out. "Give us whatever you found, and the woman and baby go free. Try to play hero, and they'll pay the price for your stubbornness." Colt stood alone in the street, his coat pushed back to reveal the Colt .45 that had made him famous throughout the territory. But this time, he wasn't fighting for money or reputation or even survival. He was fighting for something more important, the chance to protect an innocent woman and child while exposing the truth about men who hid behind law and respectability while committing murder. "I've got a counteroffer," Colt replied, his voice carrying clearly across the dusty street. "Let them go now, and I might let you live long enough to stand trial." The gunfight that followed was swift, brutal, and decisive. Colt's years of experience and righteous anger made him a force of nature that the corrupt officials and their hired guns were completely unprepared to face. When the smoke cleared, justice had been served with lead and steel, leaving the three conspirators and their mercenaries lying in the dust, while Anna and Hope emerged safely from the bank. But the real victory came weeks later, when the evidence Robert Westfield had died together finally reached federal Judge Harrison in Denver. The resulting trials and convictions sent shockwaves throughout the territorial government, leading to the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen land and the restoration of property rights to dozens of displaced families. Anna used her husband's life insurance money to establish a legal aid society that helped frontier families fight land fraud and government corruption. She never remarried, but she and Colt developed a partnership that combined her legal knowledge with his practical skills and hard-won understanding of frontier justice. Together, they traveled throughout the Southwest, investigating reports of corruption and helping honest settlers protect their rights against those who would steal their futures. It was dangerous work that made them enemies among powerful people, but it also made them heroes to families who had nowhere else to turn for help. Hope grew up strong and healthy, raised by a mother who had learned that justice was worth fighting for, and a surrogate father who had discovered that protecting others was more satisfying than any treasure he'd ever stolen. She became a lawyer herself, carrying on the work her birth father had died for and her adoptive father had fought to continue. The outlaw, who had lost his way, found redemption in protecting a widow and orphan, while the woman who had lost everything discovered that love could grow from the most unlikely partnerships. Together, they proved that sometimes the greatest love stories are born not from romance, but from shared commitment to something larger than themselves. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that true heroism often comes from those society has written off and that justice is worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of redemption, courage, and love that emerges from the crucible of shared struggle. From dusty streets to federal courtrooms, every story we tell proves that the strongest bonds are forged not in comfort, but in the fight for what's right. This is where outlaws become heroes and where love grows strongest when it's rooted in mutual respect and common cause.